To Matthew 2 today, because if you're going to talk about the advent of Christ, you're going to talk about the birth. At some point, you're probably going to stumble across the wise men from the east. I don't want to burst any of your nativity scene bubbles that you might have in your front yard, but there were probably more than 3 wise men. There were 3 gifts, but there were wise men. Odds are there were more than 3, so you probably need to go catch the after Christmas sale on plastic figures for your yard. Buy 2 or 3 more sets, put a whole army of them out there next year with gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Be a good gospel opportunity when people ask you, why do you have so darn many wise men in your yard around Jesus? That's why. Because there were 3 gifts that came to Jesus. There were wise men from the east. We don't know how many, but they make the journey across the known world because they are following a star. What kind of people you look to the stars for guidance? Well, not typically Hebrews, certainly not typically Christians. We don't open up the skylight in the church and read the stars. In fact, most of the time we relegate that to astrology, somewhere down in the corner of the newspaper, where you go find out what star sign you're born under. This is what we're dealing with when we deal with the wise men from the east. I just want to point out that we're not dealing with Hebrews that understand Torah, that have been studying the law of God, and they realize that they're supposed to follow a star. Where do they come up with that? Where do they see that? Where do they get that? We don't really know, but we know that's what brings them into this land. And so I want to read from Matthew chapter 2, just a couple verses, because what I'd like to do today is I want to help you find Jesus in His birth. I want to find Jesus in His death. And I want to find Jesus in His resurrection. If we can do that, we can find Jesus wherever we open our eyes. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. And the most fascinating thing about the arrival of the wise men, the most fascinating thing might be that they followed a star, but we'll save that. Probably the most interesting thing, at least, about the wise men is when they arrive at the place where they feel the star has brought them. Look where they go. They go to the palace of King Herod. And so you need to ask yourself, first of all, why would the wise men go to the palace of King Herod? Jesus isn't born in the palace of King Herod. Jesus is born in a manger in a stable in the little town of Bethlehem. So why don't the wise men go straight to a manger in a stable in the little town of Bethlehem? And the reason is because kings are not born in stables, in mangers, in little backwater towns like Bethlehem. Kings are birthed around kings. Right? So go to where the king lives. If a king has been born, go to the palace of the known king. If you want to follow a king, go hang out with kings. That's kind of the way we teach people even today. Go hang out with what you want to become. And yet Jesus, from the very beginning of His advent, flips that script. It isn't to go hang out with what you want to become. It's go hang out with that which needs you the most. And when you elevate that with you. So Jesus is a man who goes to the bottom of the barrel and never forgets the bottom of the barrel. All throughout His ministry, He pulls up with Him the exact kind of people He's born around. This is why we don't always like who Jesus eats with. We don't always like who Jesus associates with. We don't always like who Jesus talks to and embraces as His own, because nothing's changed with Him. He didn't forget His roots. Born in the back part of the world, lying in a manger, in a stable, not in the palaces of Herod. That's where we first find Jesus. And so it's easy to make the mistake the wise men make, which is if you want to find Jesus, go to where people are successful. Go to where there's wealth. Go to where there's power. Go to where there's authority. Because if you go to the top end of the spectrum, that's where you'll find Jesus. But Christmas teaches us otherwise. If you want to find Jesus, don't go hang out in the halls of Herod's palace. Don't go to Caesar in Rome. Go where you'd least expect the king to be born. Get ready. That's the Jesus you signed up to follow. He'll always be where you least expect Him to be born. He'll always be birthing something in a place that nobody would expect Him to be birthing something. The church needs to remember this fact, because if you want to find Jesus, stop looking in the obvious places and start looking in the least obvious of places. Start looking in the place you figure a king would never allow himself to be born. And that's probably the best place to start. And the wise men learned this lesson early, because Herod has never heard of this. And of course, once he finds out about this baby that's been born in Bethlehem, we have a disaster that ensues as Herod orders the death of every baby in the last 2 years born in Bethlehem. And Jesus loses dozens of his peer group that would have had lives if not for Jesus. And because Jesus is born in Bethlehem, it costs somebody their baby. Have you ever thought about that? Jesus is raised with that over his head, this idea that because I came into Bethlehem, someone else lost their child. And the pain of carrying that with him every day and realizing that he had to take that upon himself, as well as the sin of the world, to go to the cross, to realize that associating with me gets people in trouble. From the very beginning, just knowing Jesus was around got people in trouble. Just having Jesus in your purview, just having Jesus in your town was a struggle. And nothing's really changed. You want to find Jesus, you'll go find him in the places where people don't expect to look. Let me just give you an example for a moment, just from the popular characters in the Christmas story, all right? Think about this. Look at the people who get highlighted and featured in the story. An unwed mother carries Jesus. Where do you find Jesus? In the place you least expect him. Where does he arrive? And that single mom hasn't necessarily went through all of the steps that society says she should go through. If you want to find Jesus, start with her. He'll be hanging somewhere around that. Because he's an expression of the love of the Father. So it's fitting that if Jesus arrives, he's going to arrive in the wrong spot. Because that's the kind of God we serve, who says, who needs me the most? The ones that people have kicked out, forgotten about. You want to find Jesus, you're going to start by finding Jesus there. Look at the group of wise men that find him. Pagan astrologers from the Orient who travel across the unknown and the known world and arrive following a star to celebrate at the feet of Jesus. I mean, God actually allows himself to be found outside of the Bible. Outside of circumcision, outside of the family of Abraham. He allows himself to be found by people who don't know God and don't claim to know God. And yet, if you want to find Jesus, start there. In people who don't know the God you know, or serve the way you serve, or talk the way you talk, or read the translation you read, a good place to find Jesus will often be in the last place we expect to find him. Look at who gets the news heralded to them. Field hands, laborers guarding their sheep in the field are the first people to whom the angels come. The angels don't arrive and tell the soldiers. The angels don't tell the senators in Rome. The angels don't bother with the wealthy in their subdivisions. They go out into the field to the field hands and say, guess what? God has shown up. Peace on earth, goodwill towards men. You want to find Jesus? You'll find him in the last place you expect to look. It'll often be in the place where no one thinks to celebrate his name. But that's where Jesus will be found.